Good morning, everybody. My name is Joon-Nie Lau, and I'm Director of Asia for One IFRA Asia Pacific in Singapore. Now, to kick off this session is our trainer, Kwek Kwang King. He, of course, is the founder of Data-N, which is an agency that provides training that helps journalists integrate data journalism into daily reporting. And he has helped publications such as Foreign Policy, BBC World Service, MediaCorp, and Malaysia Kini to enhance their storytelling with data, visual and interactive components. King, of course, is in Malaysia, and he is also the competition officer of Data Journalism Award, which later became the Sigma Awards. So, he comes with a wealth of experience and expertise in looking at data storytelling, not just in this region, but also internationally. So, King, now over to you.
Thank you very much, Joon-Nie, and thank you very much to One IFRA as well as Google News Initiative for organizing this series of workshops. So let me share my screen now. For those of you who have attended last sessions, right, I will also share with you, this deck, so that you can download them. You don't have to take the screenshots, everything. Probably let me just share it now so that you can have it with you while you are watching my presentation. I have put that in the Q&A, the chat box, sorry. The link to the deck. All right, so you can download that. It's in the Google Drive. Along the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. I will check the box from time to time, all right? So last week, we talked about where to find data, how to find data about COVID-19 and public health public health reporting, right? So this week, we are going to go one further step to look at how do we go about doing data reporting, right? So I think one of the most effective ways of doing data reporting, especially for beginners, is to look at what others have done and how we can replicate the same methodology for our local reporting, or on a similar issue, right, with the same methodology, right? So here we are calling it a reporting recipe, right? So recipe is, we all know that recipe for food, especially during this pandemic, a lot of us pick up new skills, and one of them is cooking. So we have been looking at different recipes, and we try to modify recipes for our own case, with our own ingredients, right? So this can be done same with data reporting, right? So how we can look at how others have done their reporting, what data they use, how do they analyze the data, and how do they use the data to inform their reporting, right? We can try to learn from that and adapt the same methodology for our reporting. This is especially useful for beginners, when you just started with data journalism and you're not sure how can I use data to help with my reporting, right? So this is what we are going to cover. So there are three goals that I'm trying to achieve today. First is, okay, when we want to start a data-driven story, the best or the recommended way of doing that is to start forming a hypothesis or a questions that can be answered by data. So we'll go through that, and I also have an exercise for everyone to form your own hypothesis. And by forming a hypothesis, we also need to learn how do we form strong hypothesis, right? With using one element, we call question categories, okay? And then, the last one is what I just mentioned, right? How do we, look at others' reports and try to guide our own reporting? Okay, so just a review, just to recall what I have covered last sessions, right? This is the most important, probably the most important thing I covered last week, is to tell you that data journalism, what is data journalism? And data journalism is, how can you harness data to measure a problem, right? So you have data, you have quantitative information to help you measure a problem, whether the problem is very serious, how many people are impacted by the problems, right? And you can also use data to find out what is causing the problem and what are the possible solutions and how effective the solutions are. Okay, so using data is for us to do all these things, right? Just a reminder to everyone, right? We can use data to do all these things. And this type of methodology, right, is done by very few journalists, okay? Because this is a scientific research-based methodology. It is almost like you are doing a social science experiment or a social science research, okay? It is trying to uncover the root of the problem, not just reporting on the surface of the problem, right? Just to tell people that, oh, there's this problem there, right? But we use this data to help us to measure the problem, to identify who has been impacted and what are the causes of the problems as well as the solutions, right? So this is just to remind you what we are trying to do with data, okay? So for data journalism workflow, right? Many people always ask, okay, if I want to do a data story, right? What is the workflow looks like, okay? And just to show you, there are several models out there that, data journalists or data journalism lecturers, they have came up, right? They have come up with all these different models, but more or less they are the same. I won't go into details, but you can see here, the one on the left might be a little small for you. Not on the right, right? If you look at this workflow, okay. First, you find the data from an open data supplier. It could be government data, it could be data by tech companies, right? Then you do data collection. You collect data from there. You have to validate the data to make sure that that data is accurate. Then you do analysis, right? To answer the questions you're trying to answer using the data. Then visualizations, you visualize the data for your audience to understand better about the data, and data storytelling. Data storytelling could, it could include, the traditional reporting, like interviewing, writing about, the life of, several characters, right? Things like that. And then it is then delivered to the end user, right? So in this workflow, you see that data on the left here, you see that the data the information starts as a data, became information, and became knowledge, right? Knowledge is something that we have filtered, we have processed, and it can be applied, right, for our audience. The other side of it, you can see that, in terms of the capacities, right? The first part of it is more on technical competencies. The later part of it is more on creative competency. Creative competency, it is involved in, how do you visualize the data? How do you convert the data into something visual, something easier to understand? And how did you tell the stories in a creative way, right? Before that, the first part of it, there's not much creativity involved, right? It is more on technical. How do you process the data? How do you do a data analysis and things like that, right? Okay, let me see. I think the Google folder is not sharing. Let me just try it. Let me change the settings so that you can then use access the PDF file, day 2. Restricted. Okay, yeah, I forgot to change it. All right, okay, guys, you should be able to access the PDF file now. Okay, let me go back to my presentation. Cool. So now, just now when we talk about the workflow and, the workflow and what data journalism is for. So now we are going into how do we start a data journalism project, okay? So this is the first step, before we start go and find the data, or we start to do the data analysis, right? This is the first step, right? We need to figure out, right, okay, how can we start the project? Okay, we start by having a question or a hypothesis that can be answered by publicly available data. Okay, the second part of it is also very important, right? You want to find something that can be answered by data that is available, right? For the public, right? You don't want to have a questions or hypothesis, but you cannot find the data to answer your questions, right? So there are two important factors here. Two elements here, right? One is the questions or hypothesis. The second one is the data. Okay, so let's look at how it looks like. What is a hypothesis or questions? Okay? The approach of coming with a hypothesis or questions before finding a data, right? This approach is more efficient. Because why is it efficient? Because it gives you a very clear direction. Okay, it helps you to plan your project scopes and tells you when to stop, right? It gives you a clear direction because once you figure out that okay, these questions, there's no data that I can use to answer these questions, or the data that is available now, right, can't really answer this question of hypothesis, right? So if you know that that is the situation, then you know that is when you need to stop your project, which means there's no way for you to move further with the project. Then you simply have to give up and change or modify your questions or hypothesis to another one. Okay, a hypothesis is something like this, right? Let's say that okay, I have a hypothesis that women drivers are more dangerous than male drivers on the road. This is the perception. Okay, and I can also make it as a hypothesis. Is that true or not? Right? Can I prove it or disprove it using data? Can I do that? I can, right? I just have to find, let's say, when I say female drivers are more dangerous on the road, right? Which means that dangerous means that, probably there are several indicators to measure dangerous, right? To measure how dangerous they are driving, right? For example, we can see how many road accidents they are involved in. We can see how many traffic summons, traffic fines given to them due to, recklessness or due to, driving dangerously, things like that. So if I can find these indicators, right, from public data, let's say the traffic police share the data with us, right? Or I can access to data of road accidents, okay? Then I will be able to compare between male and female drivers, right? To see who have a higher, rate of involving in road accidents and also in getting traffic fines, right? So using that quantitative information, I'm able to answer my hypothesis, right? So, but we need to, instead of going to the traffic data first or going to the traffic fines data, we start with a question or a hypothesis first, right? The hypothesis can be turned into a question, right? The question is, are female or male drivers more dangerous on the road, right? That is a question. The hypothesis I just mentioned just now, right? That female drivers are more dangerous on the road compared to male drivers, right? So that is a hypothesis. So when we have we start with a hypothesis, right? We don't start with the data first, right? This is very important. We start with a hypothesis first. So when we know that, okay, the road accidents data provided by the police, right, doesn't have gender of the drivers. If that is the case, we know that there's no way for us to move further with our project, with our investigation, because the information is not there, right? So we know that we need to stop if we don't have data, right? So that is why this approach is more efficient. The last point is that it delivers a story, not just data. What do I mean by this? If you are looking at data, right, you might find that, the road accidents rate in your country has increased from this year to another year, or it has decreased from 2016 to 2020, right? But that is just telling people data, right? That is just telling people the trend of the data. It doesn't tell people a story. The story, it sounds like this, right? Okay, data analysis shows us that in contrary to public perception that female drivers are more dangerous on the road, right? The data actually tells us that male drivers are the main factors or the main, gender involved in road accidents, blah, blah, right? So that tells us a story. When you have a hypothesis or a questions, right, the answer is more like a story that you can tell. It's not just telling you data, right? Like, okay, today the stock market increased by 5%, that is not a story, right? But the story is that, okay, the stock market increased by 5% because of something, blah, 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 right? So that is a story. So it is very important to differentiate between, are you just telling people data, different data points, right? Or we are telling people a story that people care about, right? So using a hypothesis approach, right, can help you to be more efficient when you start your data journalism project. However, how do we form a strong hypothesis, right? Just now, I had the hypothesis about the gender of your drivers. That is not a very strong hypothesis, right? Because you need to make sure, so there are several things here that you need to make sure. First is that the hypothesis or questions can be proven or disproven with data, okay? The second thing is, you have to be very specific about what should be measured to achieve number one. Right? If you want to prove or disprove a statement or questions, right, you need to be very specific, right? For example, just now I used back the example, right, that female drivers they drive more, dangerously on road compared to male drivers. Is that specific enough? No, because we need to have a specific time frame, right? Is it the past 5 years? Is it the past 10 years? Or is it after something happened? For example, in some countries, probably before that, let's say some more conservative countries, right? Women are not encouraged to drive, but because there is a change in policy, right? Or change in the law, and now we are having more women drivers on the road, right? And we want to know that whether that is more, whether they are driving more dangerously or not, right? So we need to have a time frame, right? Whether it's the past 10 years, 5 years, or since 2013 or since 2015, something like that, right? And then we need to be very specific about what to measure. Are we going to measure the involvement of different gender in road accidents, right? Whether when there's a road accident happens, whether the driver is male or female. Or we want to look at certain traffic fines against them, right? Whether it's speeding, right? Because speeding can be considered as, driving dangerously, okay? Whether it's a speeding or whether they are, for example, what else? Traffic lights, right? Those kind of fines, right? So we need to be very specific about what are we trying to measure, right? There are several, when we say dangerous, right? There are different definitions of dangerous. And what are the indicators that we can use to define dangerous, okay? The third one is that the statement is important to the public or has a broad interest. This is very important because if you are trying to, build a hypothesis, right? But the hypothesis is only what you care about personally, something that interests you a lot, right? Does that, will that make it a good story for your audience? No, right? Because you need to differentiate between the things that you care about and the things that most people care about, right? So if we talk about, let me give an example, okay. Probably a very niche topic, right? Okay, which airport has the best security, for example, right? Yep, this is something that because you are a geek about everything about everything about air travel, everything about airports or aircraft, right? But it doesn't mean that this is something that people care about, right? Although yes, security at airports is something very important, especially for countries that rely on air business a lot, like Singapore. But probably in some countries, right, these are not something that is very popular. People don't care about, right? So be very, but I guess that this kind of considerations, you can discuss with your newsrooms, your editors, right, to decide, what stories have a broad interest in the society, and what stories is worth spending the time to do the reporting, right? So these are the three things that I would like to emphasize. Okay. So how do you? Then this is technical part, right? How do we start with the hypothesis, right? There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 what we call question categories, right? You can think about when you are framing your hypothesis, right? First is a problem questions, right? How big is the problem? How expensive it is? Is the problem getting better or worse, right? This is in journalism, right? This is the what questions, right? Okay, what problem are we talking about? How big, right? How expensive, okay? Well, whether it has caused a lot of financial loss to someone, to the country, and is the problem getting better or worse? Let's use COVID-19 as one example, right? How big is the problem? How many people are affected? How many countries are affected, right? COVID-19. How expensive is it, right? Expensive means that how much of economic costs, it has cost to our country, right? How much our country needs to spend, right, to address the problem. Is the problem getting better or worse, right? So this, we can look at the number of new cases every day, the number of deaths every day, right? The number of countries that are still on an uptrend in terms of new cases, right? So this will tell us, is the problem getting better or worse, right? So you can use this problem questions to help you frame your hypothesis, right? You want to measure the size or the seriousness of a problem. Then the second problem, right? The impact questions. This one, we move further, one step further to ask who are impacted by the problem, right? And how they are impacted, right? Are some groups more affected than others? What is their age, right? How old are they? Where do they live? Which area, right? This, again, using COVID-19 as an example, right? We want to know when the country is having, economic lockdown, when people can't travel, right? Industries, some of the, businesses have to close down, right? When that happens, who is the most affected by all these issues, right? How they are affected, right? And between the rich and the poor, who are more affected, in this situation? Or you can do the comparison between, different ethnic groups, right? Or the rural and urban divide, or gender, are women more affected than men? And also different age group, right? Are the older citizens, are they more affected? Or you can look at nationality, right? Are locals, citizens, or foreigners, right? Between these two groups, who are more impacted? Okay, so these are the impact questions, right? What are the impact of the problems, right? And who? Usually we are talking about human because we care about our society, human, who is affected. The third questions, we go another step further into the issue. What are the causes of the problem? Whose fault it is? What factors have made it worse, right? Those kind of problems, those kind of questions, right? Back to the COVID-19, right? If we found that there are inequality in terms of healthcare facilities, right, in different states in our country, right? So what are the causes of the problem? Is it because some state, because they are poorer, they don't have a lot of income to purchase, healthcare equipment and facilities for their citizens? Is that the problem? And what factors have made it worse, right? Is it their economic structure? Is it because they are governed by a different political party and you have this political discrimination happening, right? So what are the causes of the problem, right? Just now we look at what are the problems, who are impacted by the problems, and now we look at what causes this question, or what causes this problem, right? What make it worse? Okay, and you can use quantitative information, again, data, right, to measure the problem, right? You can look at let's say you go back to the questions of inequality, right? Inequality in healthcare facilities in different areas, right? We can look at their income. We can look at their spending on healthcare, right? To quantify the problem, to measure the problem. The last problem, right, and usually the hardest problem, and this is also something that we seldom touch on, is the solution. Okay, what are the solutions to the problem? How can we measure how effective the solution is, right? During COVID-19, right, I believe almost all governments have, implemented different kinds of financial aid to the citizens, to those who are most impacted by the pandemic, right? They have a stimulus package and things like that, right? But how effective are those measurements? How effective, right? So we can measure. How can we measure them? We can measure them by look at, if the government say that you're going to spend, amount of money, let's say 2 billion or 3 billion, right, on as financial aids to the people, right? Okay, how much does each citizen get, and are those targeted aid, or they are general, right, for everyone in the country, right? So are they effective or not? We look at, when you convert that 3 billion to per capita, how much does everyone get, and how much does that help them, in terms of addressing their financial problems, right? Comparing, right? And you can also look at, the number of unemployment and number of new employment created by the government, right, to see whether they match each other or not, right? So these are some of the quantitative information or data that we can collect to measure the effectiveness of the solutions, right? So these are the 4 major questions that we can ask, when we try to form our hypothesis or questions. And remember that the answers should be based on data, not just opinion, right? The biggest difference between data journalism and traditional reporting is that we base our report on data, on quantitative information, not just interviewing a politician, interviewing a minister, and minister tell us whatever, then we just put into our report. We did not bother to verify it. But data reporting is more on, we have the questions. We don't ask the experts, or we don't ask the politicians first, right? We try to look at data first, right? To see whether the data tell us anything about the issue that we're trying to report. Then only probably, then we go and ask the politicians, right? Sometimes we can even use our data to question the politician or to question the authority, okay? To say that, okay, you claim that you have helped so many people get jobs, right? But look at the unemployment data, right? It doesn't match what you have claimed, right? For example. So using the data is actually a very good weapon, right? In questioning those who should be accountable for the decisions made, right? Especially government officers, okay? If you have any questions, again, please put that in the Q&A sessions, and then I'll try to, the Q&A chat box, sorry, then I'll try to answer them, okay? So once you have done with your hypothesis, right, then you can do an exercise, what we call a benchmarking. Benchmarking is basically just to look around to see if there are other data projects that are very similar to the one that you want to do. Okay, what I would do is usually if I want to do about, let's say, COVID-19, many publications have done COVID-19 reporting, right? And many publications have done, very good analysis on the impacts of COVID-19 on different communities, right? So if I want to do this kind of reporting again, I would just search all the publications, especially the top ones that have done similar issues and how they have done it, okay? So we find and understand in detail the existing projects on the same topic, okay? Then we look at what are the processes used by others to produce them, right? This is to look at their methodology, right? So we can use the recipe and make our own story, right? The whole process will help you to find first ideas, right? Ideas is, okay, this is how other journalists have measured the problem, right? This is how, if there is not much data about this topic, probably they have found a way, to overcome the problem, and you can learn from that, right? So ideas. Partners, experts, right? Sometimes you know that they work with a NGO or they work with a research institution, right? To help with getting data, to help with data analysis. Probably you can do the same, right, for your own country. Or probably in your country, there's a similar institutions or people are doing the same types of research that you can get to be your partners, to help you to guide your reporting, right? And data sources, where did they get the data? This is very, very important, right? Sometimes we thought that, oh, there's no data about this issue. There's no information that I can use to measure the problem, right? But sometimes if you look at others, right, they might find an indirect way to measure the problems, right? So you might be able to use the same methodology for your reporting as well, right? So sometimes you're not creative enough, right, to overcome your problem. You might look at how others people have done it, right? So probably they are more creative than you, or probably they have a better team than you. So, but it doesn't matter, right? But you can learn from what they have done and try to apply that on your project. And the last one is, of course, you look at their tools and methodology, right? What tools they have used to do their own analysis, and look at their methodology, right? Where do they find the data? How do they analyze the data? And how do they come to their conclusion? Okay, so these are some of the things that will help you if you do a benchmarking exercise. Okay, basically to look at what others have done. Okay, so when I do my benchmarking, right, usually I will look at all these organizations, right? These are all media publications that are good in data journalism, right? So the first group, those are media publication newsrooms in the West, right? You have New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. These are all the major publications in the US, okay? Of course, as well as Bloomberg, Reuters, Guardian in the UK. ProPublica is a non-profit investigation outfit in the US, and they specialize in data journalism, right? This is ProPublica. The other one that specializes in data journalism is 538, right? They are very good at doing data analysis on politics and sports in the US. Okay, so these are the two that you can give more attention. The rest, right, those are, the top international media, right? The links here, right, that I put into the PDF file, right, you can click, right? This links brings you straight to their data journalism page. It's not the homepage of Washington Post, but it's the page of the data team, right? So go to those pages will help you to look at just the data projects published by them. The Pudding is one that has won many data journalism awards, right? They are not a full-fledged publication. They don't do daily reporting. They don't do breaking news, right? But they have a very unique take on using data to report on cultural issues, right? And a lot of their projects are very, very creative. They're much more creative than all the traditional media here, right? So the Pudding is something that I like a lot, and it will give you a lot of good ideas, when you're doing your data reporting. Then we have those from the Europe, right? DW Data. This is the Deutsche Welle data unit. You have Journalism Plus Plus. I think Journalism Plus Plus is based in the Netherlands, right? There are a bunch of data journalists who help other outlets, to do data investigation, data reporting, right? They are not a media publication. They are not a news publication, right? But they are just specializing on data journalism. And then of course, that, The Economist, right? The second group are English media based in Asia. Although we don't have as many, data journalism outlets as in the West, but some of these, media publications are doing a good job in terms of using data to tell stories. You have Hindustan Times and India Span. These two are based in New Delhi. You have Straits Times Singapore, Malaysia Kini based in Malaysia, and SCMP, the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, right? So these are some of the English media in Asia that have done data journalism works. Then the third group is non-English, but based in Asia, okay? You have Tempo, Kompas, Kata Data, all publishing in Bahasa Indonesia, based in Jakarta. Tempo also has an English version. You have Caixin. Caixin is from China, based in Beijing. You have Apple Daily, based in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, I think yesterday was their last day of publication. We are not sure will they publish again in the future. It all depends on what is happening between them and the Hong Kong authority, right? It's a shame that they have to close down, not because they don't have readers, but because of political issues in Hong Kong. We have a reader, Commonwealth Magazine, 天下杂志, from Taiwan. Okay, they are based in Taipei. Reader is especially good in data journalism. I think this year they have 3 or 4 stories that were shortlisted in the Sigma Awards 2021, of which I am the competition officer. So I think they are the organization in Asia that has the highest numbers of nomination, shortlisted entries in the awards, right? Sigma Awards is the international awards for data journalism. Then in the China, we have Peng Pai, right? China Peng Pai and Chai Xing also from China. Right? These 2 are very good in data journalism as well. And there are actually many more others, new outlets in China that have done very good data journalism, right? I would try to update this list, probably later this year to include many more new players in the industry. The last group, right, is not media publication, but these are more, where you can see the best data journalism reporting. Okay, so I mentioned the Sigma Awards, right? We just concluded the 2021 version, and we just announced the winners. So try and look at all their projects. They are really, really good projects. Probably the world's best data journalism this year. We have Online Journalism Award. This is most very US based, but here you're able to see good, not just data journalism, but also interactive storytelling and investigations. Outriders Network is a website that collects and compile different stories, online stories reports, and they will categorize them into, let's say, data journalism, interactive storytelling, different types and genres of storytelling. So it is good. It is a good database to look at how people use technology to tell stories, right? So these are some of the websites that I usually monitor and also follow up, right? To know what are the latest stories in the world of data journalism, what others are doing. Okay. All right. I'm going to show you several stories about COVID-19 and health reporting, right? And let's look at their methodology and how we can implement that in our own reporting, right? So these are some of the stories. So the first one is by the 天下杂志 Commonwealth Magazine in Taiwan. Okay. Let me open up this story. This story is for those who can't read Chinese, right? It says that 6 charts to prove that the wealth gap between the poor and the rich increase in every major crisis. Okay, so it is looking at the 2000 internet bubble and the 2003 or 4 SARS health crisis, and they look at the subprime crisis in 2008, right? And it look at the this chart is not very clear. Let me show you another chart. This one is better. Okay, this one, it looks like again there are different financial crises, right? The financial crisis here, SARS, internet bubble, and this is the subprime crisis. Okay, the blue lines shows you the growth of the bottom 20% income group, right? Which means the poorest. Okay, the red are the richest in the society, right? The top 20%. And the gray black line here, this is the other 60% in the middle. Okay, so you'll see that these are the lines here shows the growth, right? The growth rate. Okay, you can see that it's in percentage. Okay, this one percentage, right? So you can see that whenever the throughout all these different crises, right, the rich, their growth rate is always in positive, which means they are growing, right? It's only a matter of whether they are growing slower or growing faster here, right? But they are still growing, right? And their numbers is always above 5%. The growth rate is always above 5%, starting from around 2001 or 2000, right? Okay. But look at the poorest, right? They're always in a negative. Okay, this is for Taiwan, okay, Taiwan society. They're always in a negative, right? -5, -10, right? Only after 2014, they were back to positive, right? Above 0, back to the level in 2000, right? So between 2000 and 2014, right, their income have been decreasing, you see, decreasing, right? It's all in negative. So which means that, and then whenever there's a crisis happen, right, you'll see that their income shrunk even more during crisis, right? You see here and here, right? But for the rich, right, although their growth slowed down, right, but they have been increasing their income, right? So this also means that, you know, the gap between the rich and the poor keep widening, right, throughout all these years, right? Because one group is increasing their income, the other group is shrinking, their income is actually shrinking, right? Then they look at, you know, the poorest, the middle class, and the top 20. This is their income by absolute numbers. This is their employment income. This is non-employment income. Okay, so we can also do this kind of analysis, right, for our own country. Where do you get the data? Why the data, right, is not that hard to get, right? If you look at, let's look at this. This is Singapore Straits Times. Straits Times also done a story. They also did a story about the household incomes, right, decline for the first time in more than 10 years because of the pandemic. This is data about 2020. Okay, 2020 was published on 2020 first. Okay, and if you scroll down, you will see this chart. Okay, so see that change in 2020, right? 2020 in each groups of incomes, right? You'll see that their income have decreased. Okay, but who experienced the largest decrease, right? It is the first until the 10% of income group, which means the poorest community in the society, right? Their income decreased by the most. When during good time, this is during good time, 2015 to 2020, right? When everyone is increasing their income, and you see that the poorest community again increased the least compared to all others, right? They are still higher than the top income, the top earners here, right? But they are among the second smallest, right, growth when during good times. This is 2015 to 2020, right? This is 2020. Okay. So again, this is the focus here. Why is this happening, right? This is the next step that you should ask. This story is only about the data, right? Because I think the statistics department released, the Department of Statistics released the latest statistics, and they did a story on that, right? So what I want to show you here is that, you know, this kind of data is usually publicly available in all countries, right? And you can use this data to look at what have the COVID-19 done to the wealth distribution in your country. How has it impacted, you know, the poor communities, right? So this is Taiwan, this is Singapore. What about your country, right? So you can use the same methodology, the same recipe to do this kind of analysis as well, all right? So just to look at, right, the different questions categories they asked, right, in the report, right? The first one, how big is the impact to the household income? This is the question asked in the story. Probably you can ask in your story as well, right? How big is the impact? This is for the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, the impact questions: whose income is most affected? But at the same time, who made financial gain during the pandemic? In the Singapore case, right, we see that even the rich, the richest people, right, even they experience a decrease in their income. But it probably not the same in your country, right? If you look at Malaysia, right, some of the owners behind the hand gloves factories, right, because of the pandemic, they sell a lot of hand gloves, much more than they sold before, and some of them have become billionaires during the pandemic, right? So these are the impact questions, right? Who are most affected? Who lost their income, and who make financial gains, right? The cost questions: why the wealth gap widened during a crisis? How did the rich make more money, right? You probably want to look at the tax system. You probably want to look at, how did the rich make money? Are they, of course, they are not making money from their salary, right? They are making money from investment. And are the profits made in investment, are they taxable? Did they pay tax to the government? The government is like a middleman to redistribute the wealth, right? The government will, theoretically get more tax from the rich, and they're able to distribute the tax as health facilities or other kind of financial aids to the poor, right? So it acts as a regulator, right? Does that system works by looking at a number? Solution questions: how effective is the government measures in addressing the problem, right? So you want to look at what are the measures have been done by the government, and are they effective or not, right? By looking at the data to see if employment rate, they are able to control the employment rate, and what kind of jobs they have generated and things like that, right? So data, I think that those data is coming out, in this year, because this year governments will release data about last year, right? So this is something that we can keep on monitoring for this year and for next year, right? Because the pandemic continues in this year. Probably it would end of year or next year, depends on how fast our vaccinations is. And so the data for 2020, 2021, and 2022 would be very, very important to look at how the pandemic has changed the economic structure of our country, how it has impacted different communities, right? So this is something that people want to know, and also this is very important for the government, to plan their policies for the next 2 or 3 years. Yeah, I'm checking the chat box now. If you have any questions, please ask in the Q&A box. You can also put it in the chat box. I will check both, no problem. Just now we look at the economic impact of the pandemic, right? The next thing we can look at is actually the health inequality in our society. So let's look at this story. This story is done by ProPublica in the US, and it is for the state of Illinois. The first 100, okay? They look at the first 100 victims of COVID-19, the first 100 deaths of COVID-19 in Chicago, right? They found that 70 of the city's first 100 recorded victims are Black, right? They are Black people. Then they'll go into and tell you the different, right? So did they get the data from the government? No, guys, no. They have to collect the data by themselves, right? By reading different news, by looking at government data as well. But the government data doesn't tell you all these details, right? So they have to find out, the data by themselves. And why do they only use the first 100? Because this is the first 100, right? So it shows when we are still not prepared for the pandemic, right? When we still don't know much about the pandemic, right? The virus, right? Who are the first victims, right? Usually that will tell you who are the most vulnerable society communities in your society, right? And because they cannot get the data of everyone in the whole state, right? So they decided to focus on a small sample and try to use that sample to show a bigger picture. This is usually what we do where we don't have the complete data, right? In very few cases, we would have the complete data. So when we don't have all the data, what do we do? Do we do nothing? Do we just talk to the experts, to get their views? Or we try to collect a small sample of data that, can be representative of the bigger picture. and use that, small sample of data to tell our story. Okay, that is not the ideal situation, but there is no best situation here. There's no comprehensive data here. So let's, probably our best bet is to look at a small sample of data. So this is what they did, right? They look at the first 100 deaths and look at who are they, where do they live, what are their age groups, and things like that. I know in many countries, or in many of our countries here in Asia, our government don't really give us all the details in the COVID-19 data, right? Especially the victims, who are they, what is their age group, or where do they live, right? But sometimes, right, we'll get this information from media reports, right? And by collecting those reports, we probably are able to give our audience a better picture of, who are the most vulnerable, who are the, most impacted during the pandemic. I think many countries still don't have those kind of information yet. And this is how we as journalists, we can start to collect information. And at some point, right, do a story about it, okay? So you can see that they have the map to show you where the hospitals and where are the Black populations, right? So this is looking at the health inequality among different ethnic groups in the US. Right, so let's look at the problem questions, right? The problem questions that they are trying to ask here is how many people have died of COVID-19, right? How many? How serious it is compared to other similar countries, okay? You compare your own countries with other countries. And the impact questions here is which community has the highest mortality rate? Which communities are the most impacted by the COVID-19? And you want to measure that by looking at the mortality rate, the death rate, okay? The cost questions, you can ask what is lacking in the community that led to the high death rate, right? So why is the community suffering more than other community? There must be some reasons, right? Is it because they have poor health facilities? Is it because they don't have hospitals? Or their hospitals have fewer hospital beds? What are the causes, right? So you can use data to tell this kind of story, okay? So this is a good example that I think we all can, replicate for our own society or country. The next one is done by Internews. Internews is not, of course, it's not a media publication, but Internews, they have done a training for Kenyan journalists, right, to look at the healthcare facilities in different counties or districts in Kenya. So let me just show you the story. They're also trying to develop a reporting recipe for this kind of healthcare analysis. So here, data recipe, health capacity in Kenyan counties, right? They are hoping that this methodology, this recipe can be replicated in other African countries as well, okay? So they developed this data recipe actually step by step. So first, they tell you these are the questions they want to answer by data, right? Which counties have the highest and lowest access to isolation beds per capita? Then the same questions for general ICU beds, isolated ICU beds, ventilators, the number of COVID-19 cases, and to what extent the counties meet the recommended numbers for beds and ventilators. So there's a standard, right? The recommended numbers, right? So they try to answer all these questions using data. And they'll tell you that, how they get the data from different sources, okay? And you download the data, how you can make a copy and do the analysis, understand the data, right? Step by step, as I mentioned just now, do the analysis of the data, or where to click, where to do, right? So how to prepare the ICU bed data, right? And then begin the analysis, step 11, okay? So it's a step-by-step data recipe. But this might not, be applicable for most of our countries because these are all for the African countries. So now they'll nail down using the data, they are able to find counties with the best access to isolation beds and the worst access to isolation beds as well, in which county. Okay. So if you scroll down, they look at different, just not look at the beds. Now you look at ICU beds and the cases, using the same methodology. Yep. So this is a very detailed data recipe, right? Of course, not all stories will tell you that, oh, this is how we analyze our data step by step, right? But this is what I meant by data recipe, right? We can look at the workflow of others, and then we can try to replicate it for our own reporting, okay? So the questions problem here is actually, want to look at the health inequality in Kenya, okay? Is there an unequal distribution of COVID-19 related healthcare facilities in Kenya? So they look at the beds, they look at the ventilators, right? They look at ICUs, right? And then they want to know which counties have the worst or best healthcare facilities related to COVID-19, right? And another question that was not answered here in the data recipe is what are the factors behind this inequality? As I mentioned just now, you can look at, the spending, healthcare spending. You can also look at, the political issues there, right? So this depends on which country are you looking at, right? But this is a very good data recipe that I think all of us can try to replicate. And the other thing that some of our countries are moving out from COVID-19 already, right? Moving out from the pandemic. We are looking at post-pandemic, post-COVID-19 scenarios, right? So one question that have been asked by many people is that, when is our next pandemic? What would cause our next pandemic, right? And to look at these questions, right, you need to answer some questions here, right? So I put up some questions here. First is that, have infectious diseases been increasing before COVID-19, right? Has it been increasing? The answer is actually yes. Okay, if you look at some of the academic papers. The cause questions, right? What causes the emergence and spread of infectious diseases? Are those enabling factors increasing or decreasing? So we'll look at whether we are going to get the next pandemic very quickly, right? How is the possibility of getting the next pandemic, right? Getting to the next pandemic, right? Then we might want to ask, like, what helped to spread infectious disease, right? What are the factors that, not just create infectious disease, but also help to spread the infectious disease? What are the factors? And what happened to those factors? Are they increasing or are they decreasing, right? So there's one article, right, explains 5 reasons why pandemics like COVID-19 are becoming more likely. Right? There are 5 reasons. If you look at the 5 reasons: global travel, urbanization, climate change, increased human-animal contact, health worker shortage, right? So to estimate, right, or to tell people, are we going to get the next pandemic in a very short time, right? We might want to look at these 5 factors, right? And other factors depends on, where did you get your information from. One thing that is very, very, very important is actually increased human-animal contact, right? We know that we know that there is this debate going on whether the COVID-19 virus is actually started in Wuhan, China, and is it from animal or from bats, right? Because previously there are other infectious diseases that are spread came from animals. Because why? Because we keep increasing the human-animal contact, especially with wildlife. And how is that made possible? Because of wildlife trade, right? So one indicator to look at, whether we'll get, how fast are we going to get another infectious disease, is actually look at the wildlife trade, okay? And wildlife trade, of course, here is looking at China, but you can also look at other countries, right? With a high wildlife trade, for example, Vietnam, for example, Indonesia, right? And let me show you the story. So this is done by Health Analytics Asia. It is a data journalism, but specializing in health, outlet based in New Delhi, India. Okay, so they did a story about the next pandemic or about infectious diseases, and they look at different diseases. They were all caused by animals, right? And they look at after the SARS crisis in 2002, right? China actually banned the wildlife trade. However, right, after a few years, it came back again. You can see the chart here, right? So this actually increased the possibility of us humans bringing virus, from the forest or from the from jungle, right? So they look at you see that countries that cater to China demands. One of them is Indonesia. The second is Malaysia, right? So we also have a high risk in Indonesia and Malaysia because we keep, bringing out animals from their, wild habitat, and that might means, bringing out diseases and viruses as well. Okay, so here are some of the, so for us based in, Singapore or Indonesia, right, we can actually start to look at our own wildlife trade. Has it been increasing or has it been decreasing? Because the next virus could come from one of our countries, right? We don't know. So the questions here, again, just to go back to the problem, cause, and solution questions, the cause question is what causes the emergence? Okay, I have mentioned this. The last one is what have we done to mitigate those factors and how effective are the efforts? This one is especially on wildlife trade. Have our governments passed some laws to regulate it? How have the enforcement efforts been increased, to stop more wildlife trade, right? And where the wildlife trade is happening. One tip for you guys, the travel websites, right? If you go to travel websites and you go to markets, wet markets, especially wet markets, right, in Asia, right? People sometimes, if the markets sell wildlife, people would mention that in travel sites when they are writing reviews about a certain market, right? Because that tourists like to visit local markets, right? And sometimes they would post photos or they will, reveal something about the markets, right? Usually they will pick up the most interesting facts about the markets, right? Say that, oh, this market sells bats or this market sells crocodile, right? Things like that, right? So from there, you're actually able to identify, which markets in your country have those products. Sometimes you can also look at restaurants, okay? Some restaurants, they sell illegal wild meat, right, for their customers. They don't make it, they won't make it open. They don't make it open, but the tourists or people, their customers might leave some reviews in one of those, restaurant reviews websites. So those are some of the data, some of the information sources you can check. All right. Okay, let me, I saw one Q&A in the one questions. So let me finish this before we go into the exercise, and then I can answer the questions, right? So tips to a strong hypothesis. This is I just want to show you, this is one example on how you can develop a strong hypothesis. I will ask you to do that later. You start with, let's say, children in the hypothesis, right? The children in this country are dying of malnutrition, okay? So you start with a vague hypothesis with a general problem questions, right? You are saying that this is a problem, right? Children in this country are dying of malnutrition, but you have to be more specific about it, right? So let's be more specific. Most of the children in this country who died before the age of 5 died of malnutrition. Now we added a impact questions, right? Who do you mean by children? Here, we say that children who died before the age of 5, right? So we specify one specific group of children. Can we be more specific? We can do that by modifying a hypothesis into most of the children in this country who die off before the age of 5 die of malnutrition and live in the poorest provinces. Okay, so we added another impact questions into the hypothesis, right? Not just before, not just before the age of 5, but also they live in the poorest provinces. Okay, this could be an impact question. This could also be a cost question, right? The cost question is that because they are poor, so they are suffering from malnutrition, right? So this is one of the factors. But again, this is just the hypothesis, right? We want to prove it using data. Can we use data to prove it? Yes, we can find out, the cause of death for children before the age of 5. And then we can look at, where do they live, right? If we have the data, we're able to answer the hypothesis. If we want to add in a solution problem to the hypothesis, we can modify it into most of the children in this country who died before the age of 5 died of malnutrition and live in the poorest provinces, despite a government food aid program that was supposed to cut malnutrition rates in half over 2 years. So we added another perspective to the hypothesis by including a government measurement, right? The government policy that aims to cut malnutrition rates in half in just over 2 years, right? But despite these government policies, we still have most of the children died of malnutrition, which means these government policies might not be very effective, right? So now we have a very specific, hypothesis with several parts that we need to answer, right? Again, hypothesis is something that has not been proven. So we need to find data to prove different parts of this hypothesis, right? So if you're able to answer all the different hypotheses here, okay, then you're able to come up with a good story, right? Right? You're able to come up with a good story and probably something that, will force the government to do something because you are looking at the effectiveness of the government policy. All right, so I think this is one of the examples that I want to show you on how you can transform a weak hypothesis into a strong hypothesis. Okay, so before we go into your exercise, let me try to answer your questions. Okay, there's one question by Bhavani. Having collected the raw data from various sources, what tools could be used to analyze and present the data in the story? To analyze the data, right, the most common tools are, of course, Excel, right? If you don't have access to a paid Microsoft Office software, you can always use Google Sheets, right? Google Sheets work as good as Excel. I always use Google Sheets, right? So those are the major tools that you use to analyze data, right? You don't have to go for like complicated database tools or use coding like Python or R to do the analysis, right? Usually for simple data sets, like the one we talk about, about incomes of different groups in a country, COVID-19 cases that I showed you last week. Those can be done easily by Google Sheets or Excel spreadsheets. Okay, you only need very complicated, more sophisticated tools when you have huge data sets. For example, data sets that have millions of records, or data sets that have multi-layer structure. Then you need to use more sophisticated data tools. But usually, data that you get from your own statistical department or the international organizations like UN, World Bank, WHO, right? Usually those data, you can use simple spreadsheet to analyze them. The second part of the question is about how to present the data. This we will cover in the next section, right? The next session is about data visualization. So I will show you several tools, free, online, that can help you to generate charts and maps for your storytelling to present the data. Okay, so I hope I answer your questions. Any other questions? No, yeah? No, then I have questions, okay? I'm going to give you an exercise so that you can do that. Okay, let's try to think like a data journalist, right? Based on what I have shown you just now, you can get all the slides by downloading the PDF, right? I would like you to build 3 questions or hypotheses that can be answered by data, right? Just like how I built the hypothesis here. Okay, this one. Right, they should be related to health reporting. So we try to limit our issues because we are about, the whole workshop is about health reporting or COVID-19. So if the hypothesis or questions include several things, you can split it into multiple hypotheses. You can split it into 2 or 3 hypotheses, right? Use question categories to help you form a specific hypothesis that is measurable. The questions categories is here, yeah? Here, right? Do you want to measure the problem? Or you want to measure the impact of the problem, the cause of the problem, or the solutions to the problem, right? Which one do you want to measure, right? So based on this 4 different categories, you can form your own hypothesis, okay? And then the last question is that, is the data you need available, right? What data you need, and is the data that you need available publicly? What data do you need to measure or answer your hypothesis or your questions, right? Are those data available? So I need you to write your answers in a shared spreadsheets, right? So that we can learn from each other. What happened is that after you put in here, I'm going to give you comments. I'm going to give some comments afterwards, right? Probably before next session, next Wednesday, I can put in some comments about, you know, your hypothesis, you know, whether this is a good hypothesis, how you can make it stronger, and things like that, right? So I'm going to share with you this spreadsheets. I'll put it in the chat box so you all can go to the spreadsheets. Okay, now you have it. So you can put in everyone, you just take one role, right? Okay. And you can put in, for example, I'll put in my name, King, okay, my hypothesis, blah, 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 okay, male, female drivers are more dangerous on road compared to male drivers, right? Yeah, and then I can put in the third hypothesis if I have more than one, yeah? And what data do I need? Is the data available? Yes, from the police department, for example. Okay, so try to fill up. Each of you can pick one role and start to put in your name and think about a hypothesis, you know, that is related to health reporting, right? Not female drivers. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so here are the 4 questions I would like you to put in. We have another 15 minutes, so use this 15 minutes to put in your hypothesis or questions. You can have 1 or 2 or 3 questions, hypothesis, right? Again, some of the tips, right? Remember? Specific about what you want to measure, okay? And a statement that can be proven or disproven with data, right? It has to be answered by data, not by talking to any experts or politicians or government officers, right? You need to find data to answer your hypothesis or questions, okay? And make sure that it has public interest, okay? And this is if you have downloaded this presentation slides as PDF, you're able to see this example on how to transform a weak hypothesis, a very vague hypothesis, to a very specific hypothesis by including all the different question category, right? So try to do that as well. And before next sessions, I would give my comments in the same Google Sheets so that you can look at, my feedback and how well you did with the exercise, right? This is actually the first step to think like a data journalist. This is the kind of exercises that we always go through when we are trying to think about our story. Okay, cool. Yeah, put in your name first, probably, you know, so that you know that this role belongs to you, so that other people won't accidentally edit your roles, right? Put in your name first. Put in your name first so that you know that this role is for you. You can also do this. I recommend you do this now, right? We still have 15 minutes to do it now. If I ask you to do it later, you might forget. You are busy with other things, right? So let's do it now. you have questions, you can put it in the chat box or the Q&A as well about this exercise. I can help to answer that. Now we have we have 2 hypotheses already. Chong, you might want to pick something that has public interest and is related to health reporting. I think Jessica has this is a good topic to investigate: teen pregnancy during the pandemic. How are you going to measure it? Yeah. Bhavani, so your questions are: the poor people more fearful of COVID-19 virus than the rich people in Singapore? I think the tricky part here is that how do you define fearful and how do you measure that? Okay, think about that. Is there an indicator of fear? Yeah, and how are you going to scientifically measure that? Probably you can frame it, in another way. We have 10 of you here already. 8 of you, right? Others, please try. There's no right or wrong. Just think about some. You can also think about your next reporting projects and try to make a hypothesis. Try to use a different approach to your reporting, right? Instead of the traditional one, try to think about, can you incorporate some data in your reporting? It could still be a traditional reporting where you talk to experts, you interview people on the streets, right? But probably, in the middle or at the end part of your story, you can include some data to help to enhance or to help to strengthen your story. So Claire, your hypothesis says Singaporeans struggle with long work from home hours during COVID-19 pandemic. So what do you mean by struggle? Yeah, try to define that struggle. Is it because Singaporeans are, let me see how I can reframe that. Fang Kai has an interesting hypothesis that vaccination rates of neighborhoods are directly correlated to the number of vaccination centers in each neighborhood. Yeah, probably you are saying that if you live nearer to vaccination centers, it is more likely that you will get vaccinated, right? I think that makes sense, right? Because it's more convenient. But you still need data to prove that. So this is a good hypothesis. People in rural areas, so this is for Chong, people in rural areas have less chance to access to vaccination than people in urban areas. Okay. Jessica, so you're trying to look at the teenage pregnancy in the Philippines, right? The data you said is about who gave birth since 2020 to look at their age, right? What about teenage who are pregnant but did not give birth or did not give birth in a hospital? Or they give birth without registering with the authority, right? Which means that it is not in the government numbers. This is the challenge, right? When you are trying to measure something that that is a social taboo, that will have social stigma that people don't want to talk about. For example, how many gays or lesbians in a society, which is something that's very hard to know, right? Because people don't tell you that. People don't declare that, right? So teenage pregnancy is the same thing, right? Sometimes they got pregnant, but they don't want to tell other people about it. Or, sometimes they decided to not have the children. Sometimes they decided to have their children without going to any health facilities, right? And it is not in the official numbers. So in that case, what is a better way of measure it, right? Yeah, we have more friends putting in their hypothesis, which is good. This is actually interesting from Haiti. More people in Singapore consuming news during the pandemic. The interesting thing, I'm more interested in this. They are consuming news from alternative media during the pandemic. Could be misinformation, right? Could be some YouTube channels that are full of propaganda. We know that during the pandemic, there are a lot of propaganda, both from the Western countries as well as from China, right, to argue about which vaccines is better, with the origin of the virus and things like that, right? So yeah, it would be interesting to look at whether the alternative media they have increased their readerships and viewerships number. And increase in pet ownership during the pandemic. Yeah, this is also interesting. Pet ownership, right? Because you stay at home, you feel lonely. You go and adopt a pet, probably. But how are you going to measure that? Wait, is there data about pet ownership? So for Bhavani, your hypothesis about panic buying, right? It's hard to measure as well, right? How do I know people who are, okay, first, how do you know how many people panic buying, right? And what do you mean by panic buying? How do you quantify it? What is the amount of goods, amount of products that you bought in one time considered as panic buying? And the next part of your hypothesis is even harder to prove, is that those who make panic buying, are they rich or poor? The NDUC fair price, do they have statistics? I'm not very sure, right? And if you get data from Department of Statistics, you have to be very specific. Everyone, for the data you need, right, be very specific what data that you need. It's not about data from which department, but what kind of data that you need. Be specific about it, right? For everything here, I try to be specific. The more specific that you can be, the easier for you to know whether there's a story or not, whether are you able to find the data or not. Okay. Yeah, Bhavani, no problem. I'm not like picking on you, right? I'm just giving comments to all the different hypotheses here. Yeah. Sometimes you can, reframe a hypothesis so that it is easier to measure. Yeah. But yeah, all our questions start with curiosity, right? We are curious about something. So we try to explore if we can measure or quantify something. But sometimes, a lot of things in the real world is not perfect, right? Sometimes a lot of things don't have any data, but sometimes you can use indirect data to measure it. Some of the indirect measure, like for example, right, is actually your Google search data, right? What is that product that Google has about the search data? Google Trends, yeah, Google Trends. So if you go to Google Trends for your country, you might be able to know what people are searching during pandemic. That might be useful for you to measure something, right? But you don't know who are the people behind the searching. That is the harder part, right? But if you look at, if your country is huge, like Indonesia, right? You have different provinces. And some of the provinces, that, those are like the cities, those are the urban provinces, those are the rural provinces, right? You might be able to use the search data from those provinces to correlate their search interest with their social economic status. Yeah, right. So that's probably one of it. Right, guys, we are 11:30 now, Kuala Lumpur time. So that is the end of our second sessions, right? So please continue with your hypothesis building. Before next Wednesday, I would put some comments here, right? So that you have a better idea of, how hypothesis building, looks like. But I think this is a good exercise for all of you. I think most of you don't have this kind of experiment, of experience, right? Thinking about a social issue in this approach, in this way, right? And that is the thing that I want you to try for these sessions. And that's it for sessions 2.